Aaron, it is right around 7 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. But for everyone that's just now joining, this workshop is being recorded. So if you miss any portion of it, it will be available on our website within 24 to 48 hours. So you'll be able to watch it there. There's also more workshops for the rest of the week that you can register for if you have not already registered for them. We've got a great lineup for today for the remaining part of the week. And so I'm going to hand it over to Aaron. He's got an amazing workshop presented for you. So Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week. I am honored to be the first workshop of the week. When today it's called Coffee with QISP. So everybody, grab your cup of coffee, get your pot of coffee going, and let's get this talk. One of the things that I ran into this year and why I decided to do this workshop is because a lot of people have been coming to me and they've been saying, hey, I've been in business for like 40 years, and all of a sudden now I'm required to do have permit coverage. What's this all about? I don't understand. So in the last couple of years, because of especially in California, because of SB 205, I've had a lot of people coming in and asking me, when I've been in business for so long, why is this here? So what happened was what SB 205 did was basically said that when you apply for a business license, you have to now prove that you either have or don't need permit coverage. And so people are coming to me after not being in the permit for years and saying, I never heard of this, what's going on? So the whole point of this discussion, it's like I said, it's more of a sit down, it's more of a chat, like you sit down like we're sitting down around a table having a chat. We're going to talk about if you have to have permit coverage, what is it you require and what different kinds are there and what it entails. So let's get started. Oh, by the way, again, I am Aaron Ortiz with WGR Southwest. Thank you. So let's get started. First, we're going to do a brief background, talking about the background of the permit so you understand what it is and why you're in it. Then we're going to talk about Standard Industrial Classification Code systems. People ask me about that all the time, and it's actually an integral part of the permit process. And then we're going to talk about the different coverages, which is the notice of intent. And also we're going to talk about no exposure certification. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the notice of non-applicability, which is an exemption. So first, California has taken steps for years to protect water quality. It's been going on for a long time. In fact, way back in 1949, they passed a law called the Dickey Water Act, which basically it set up the regional board or the stormwater state water resources control board, and then from that they broke it up to 9 regions because basically California is such a long, varied state. They broke the state up in different regions because everybody has different weather at different patterns at the same time of the year. And in fact, the Central Valley in and of itself is so big, even though it's Region 5, it's actually broken up into 3 sections. You have the Redding, Sacramento, and Fresno section. So you have, it's rather large state. So what happened was in 1972, the Clean Water Act came out. That was basically it was amending an old 1948 law, and from that, it made it unlawful for pollutants to basically you can't just let water go into the navigable waters of the United States. So one of the terms you hear a lot is the waters of the United States. So well, that's gonna be kind of key later on, especially when we get into the NONA. What do I mean by the waters of the United States? That's kind of a large subject, and we're not going to go into the details of that, but that term comes up. Also, the Clean Water Act establishes the NPDES program. So this all came back. There's a whole, I have a, last year at the Stormwater Awareness Week in 2023, I do kind of a history of, in more detail, you might want to consider after this week, maybe going back and take a look at last year's and take a look at my presentation from last year to kind of get more of a history on that. So then in 90, what happened was the Clean Water Act was working. Water was getting cleaner. Facilities weren't allowed to just let water go anymore to the waters of the United States. They had to now make sure that when water left their property, it left relatively clean. But they found that it wasn't enough. So they revised the Clean Water Act and basically made it so that now they created a general permit program, which means they have a general permit is a general set of rules, and from this general set of rules, you can adapt your facility to meet those general rules. Okay, and in my regular training, I talk about the different rules and how you are supposed to follow those rules. Well, also in '87, they also created what they call a partnership, where the federal government said, "Look, here's a Clean Water Act. We'll make sure that the water is clean. However, states, if you want, you can come apply for and administer this federal program rather than having the federal government administer it directly." Of which most states have opted to do that. Just about all of them have adopted to do that. So in September of '89, California applied for and received most of those requirements, including the general permit program that most people find themselves facing, and that we're going to talk about today. So what you find is when you see and you require general permit coverage, it is a state issued permit with Federal Clean Water Act backing. Okay. And the regional boards are responsible for overseeing and enforcing this program. So whenever you interact with the water board, you're actually working with the individual regions. So that's kind of a brief background. So lots of pollution. The Clean Water Act happened. It revised an old program that wasn't working very well. And then basically '87, it was revised, and now we have the Clean Water Act. And then a couple of years ago, California enacted SB 205, which basically said, look, people are not getting in they're supposed to be part of the program. Since 1992, we've had permits in California, but a lot of people didn't realize they need to be in the program. A lot of people thought, well, I don't need to be in the program, or didn't even know a program existed. And so what they did was, the way the state made sure that everybody knew was, with SB 205 now, when you have to apply for a business license, now they say you have to double check that. That way they can make sure that everybody who should have permit coverage gets permit coverage. Okay, so a key component of permit coverage is the Standard Industrial Classification Code system. Okay, so what is it? Well, the Standard Industrial Classification Code system was established back in 1930, so it's not new. In fact, there's another system that's replacing it, but right now under the general permit runs under still the SIC code system. It was developed by the Department of Labor, run by OSHA. The system is broken down into 10 divisions, and then you can see them listed there, forestry, mining. But in particular, for most of us, we have things like manufacturing, transportation. Those are the things, wholesales. Those are the ones that you'll see or be areas that are going to be under general permit coverage. Because the general permit, what it does is they said, look, there's certain types of businesses we think are going to require permit coverage. And so when you have a business that has an SIC code in this category, whether it's manufacturing or transportation, we think these categories have a higher chance of polluting. Therefore, we're going to say that if an SIC code matches this particular area, you're required to have permit coverage. So you may ask, what does a SIC code system have to do with general permit? Well, first off, the attachment A of the general permit is basically, it lists, for the most part now, there is section 1 of attachment A. You take a look there, you see section 1 is more based on industrial activities, right? But I'm not going to go into detail, but most of these facilities here you see, they are also required to have special requirements to them. But the bottom line is, as you can see, the section manufacturing, well, you see they all have SIC codes. So if your facility has an SIC code that matches in these categories, you're required to have permit coverage. So one, SIC codes matter, because if your SIC code says you require permit coverage, you need to get permit coverage. And technically, if you've been in business for a while in California and haven't had permit coverage, you're actually out of compliance with the general permit, because you should have been in coverage since 1992 if you've been in business that long. Two, SIC codes also determine things that you have to sample for. So if you see in table 1, there are different facilities. Basically, that's a category. So like 33, basically that everyone in the category, you see, have extra things. So part of the general permit, which will, again, if you have general permit training, you can find out about how sampling requirements. There are extra things you have to sample for, and this list. So SIC codes are important because one, first off, they tell you whether you need to have general permit coverage or not. For example, if you're a classroom, even a school has an SIC code, but they're not required permit coverage because their SIC codes and their industrial activity doesn't require it. However, a bus depot does, or manufacturing, or a landfill, they all require permit coverage because their SIC code and their industrial activity require it. So now here's a rub where some people have never sure SIC codes and why it's important to do it. Well, a government or non-governmental institution may determine as to what SIC codes you or your facility should have. It really is up to you to determine what your SIC codes are, okay? Because you're the one that determine if you find out that, hey, what my business, based on my SIC code, it doesn't require permit coverage. Then when you get tagged by SB 205, you can tell them, hey, this is my SIC code. This is what we do for a living, or here's our industrial activity. We don't require permit coverage. So you again, that's what people are finding out. However, if you're not sure, you can go to the directly to the source. This is the website where it's where you can go and look it up. It's the Standard Industrial Classification System. You can look it up and find what you're looking for. In fact, what you want to do. For example, let me show you. Let me just go there real quick. Let's see if I can call it up. I'm not sure, but what happens is you can go there and then you find and then you have descriptions, and it helps you to understand what your SIC code is. Now, if you need help, there's always people like me who are around to help you out. But if you need permit coverage, once you figure out your SIC code and you find out, okay, so let's just say you do your research, and in your research you find out, oh man, I do need permit coverage. Well, what's next? So then you determine your SIC code. Okay, according to attachment A, yeah, I do need. So what do you panic? Well, no, not necessarily, because you have options. And let's talk about the different types of coverage. First off, once you have your SIC codes, then you have to determine a couple of things. Do you need your full notice of intent coverage? It's called NOI coverage. Or do I need no exposure certification coverage? Or do I qualify for a NONA exception? Okay, we're going to talk about these individually because it's important, because each one of these points, if you don't quite reach it, for example, if you don't quite reach this NEC status yet, but you can, that's something to consider. Seriously consider. If you are able to reach a NONA exemption, or you may not, but you could, something to consider. So first, let's talk about NOI coverage. If your facility discharges stormwater that comes into contact with industrial activity or activities that does not meet with NAC or NONA requirements, you must apply for the full general permit NOI coverage. Okay. So in other words, if you have exposure, and we'll talk a little bit about that, especially in the NEC section, but if you have exposure of any kind, then you're going to have to apply for NOI coverage. So what does this entail? Okay, so again, like I said, you find out, wait a minute, all of a sudden I have to have this. So what's this NOI thing? Okay, well, by the way, quick note, since it's just you and I sitting here around the table having a cup of coffee, sometimes it's better to get in the permit, get coverage, and then work your way to either a NEC or NONA, and then get out. It's better to stay in compliance with the laws than to stay out unless you're really close. Because unfortunately, the Clean Water Act allows for third parties on behalf of the environment to be able to sue you or threaten to sue you. So what I'd recommend is if you find out you require permit coverage and you've been required it for a long time and you haven't got it, and you don't quite meet the NEC or NONA requirements yet, but you could, I would get in under the NOI. I know it's a pain. Unless, let's say, unless you can immediately become NEC compliant or immediately become NONA compliant. If that's like maybe 6 months to a year off, you figure, well, I can't do it right now, but I could do it in the future. Then it's better to become compliant with a permit, get in under an NOI, and then you can switch over to an NEC or a NONA. But I mean, if you can go directly to an NEC or go directly to a NONA, then that's ideal. Okay. But first off, if you require permit coverage, if you look at the SIC code system, you go through it and you say, look, oh man, I need to have permit coverage, and I can't really be NEC compliant for at least 6 months or for a couple months yet, or I might be able to build dig or give a big section that we can put all our water to that might meet that known requirement, but you can't do it right away. Then it's better to be compliant, get in the permit. Yeah, it's going to cost you a bit, but then eventually, especially if you can get a NONA, it's worth the expense. Just get in the permit, work your way towards the NONA, and then when you get that NONA, then you're out and you're done. So I always err on the side of caution and make sure that you stay compliant with the permit. Again, if you can go directly to an NEC or directly to a NONA, that's optimal. That's your best choice. Okay. Coffee. Excellent. So what does it take to file a NONA? Well, first of all, you need to create a permit registration documents. Okay. And this is the biggest expense because and there was a permit that came out in 1997. It was on for a long time. And then in 2015, a new permit came in that replaced the 97 one. And this one really revised the permit dramatically and caused a lot more research and a lot more detailed things that required a lot more to developing a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So you're saying, okay, what's that? Well, it's part of what you call your permit registration document, but also, remember how I told you earlier, it's a general permit program? What happens is you have, like I said, it's a permit, it's a federal program, but it's administered by the state of California. That's why it's issued by the state of California. But the general permit has these general set of rules. And it says, look, you need to clean your property or you have to do good housekeeping. Okay, that's literally what it says. And of course, it gives you a big detail. Again, if you do my training, if I were to do stormwater training, you would be able to see, here's the different requirements for good housekeeping. Okay, but it doesn't tell you how to do good housekeeping. It says to do good housekeeping. What your stormwater pollution prevention plan does, it tells the state, here's how I intend to comply with that requirement, the general requirement to do good housekeeping, to do erosion control, to do different aspects of the BMPs, the best management practices. Those different things required in the general permit in sections 10 of the permit. Those things that are spelled out for you. Your SWEP is the one that says, we call them a SWEP, by the way, stormwater pollution prevention plan, or SWEP. It's kind of colloquial in our business. It's your SWEP tells the state and everybody else, because it's a public document, how you plan to follow it. So it's not only just the plan that you need to keep on site all the time, but it's also part of your registration documents. And two, you need to develop a facility site map. And boy, you should see the long list of things for the requirements for the map. And sometimes there's so much that you can't put it all on one map. Well, the permit says you can use several maps to outline different aspects of your facility as required by the general permit. Another thing, as of 2015, now everybody's required to go through the SMART system, Stormwater Multi-Application Report and Tracking System. SMARTS is the online reporting website that people have to go through in order to administer their compliance. So if you haven't had permit coverage, you got to start a SMARTS account. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about a SMARTS account is you can have one account and you can have several businesses that you can connect to your account. Okay. Each individual business will have its own separate, what they call a WDID number, it's Waste Discharge Elimination System number. So that way each facility has a unique number. So you can have one SMARTS account with several different facilities underneath that account, but it's still one SMARTS account. So so first you need to create the smart SWEP. Then you need to create a sitemap, which, by the way, it's interesting is because even though the sitemap needs to be in the SWEP, they still, when you submit it on SMARTS, they want you to submit the SWEP map separate from the SWEP itself, even though it's embedded in the SWEP as well. Then you need to submit your notice of intent application on SMARTS, and then pay the general permit fee, which is usually somewhere around $1,700 and change. I'm not exactly the exact amount. I think it's based on several factors. So what's involved in notice of intent compliance? Okay, it involves several things. First off, you need to perform monthly non-stormwater inspections. So one of the first things to get is every month you have to during the month you have to go out on a day without rain and walk around and make sure that your facility is doing its BMPs. So something that's not mentioned on here, but something that really needs to be mentioned: BMPs, best management practices. BMPs are things that you do or things that you build to reduce or eliminate pollutants in stormwater. Okay, so when you're performing monthly inspections, your job, and remember I told you about the SWEP? The SWEP tells the state and tells the world, here is our BMPs that we're using, our best management practices we're using to comply with the general permit. So once you put it in your SWEP, you need to follow it. And so what you do once a month is you go around your site and say, okay, here's our BMPs, here's the things we're doing. Are we still doing it? Are we sweeping like we're supposed to? If we have berms, those are structural BMPs, physical ones. Are the berms up? Okay. Do we have covers? If we have a treatment system, the treatment system working, there's different BMPs. And what your job to do once a month is make sure on a day without rain that your BMPs are in place and doing their job. Okay. And you're supposed to do this monthly inspection on during daylight business hours, because one of the things you have to do during your monthly inspection is look for water coming on your property or coming off your property. Okay, so let's just say you have water. Now, there's an expression we use in stormwater. It's called only rain down the drain. And for the most part, that's true. But when you're under the general permit, there are certain types of water that are allowed to leave. Irrigation, water, as long as there's certain requirements that it meets. Drinking water can leave. Firefighting water can leave. There are different types of water that aren't rainwater that are allowed to leave your property. They're authorized to leave. And so if you see that during the month, you're supposed to document that. So remember, nothing leaves a property without being monitored. That's the whole point of the permit, is to make sure that that stuff that leaves your property is either clean or is clean, and that either it goes to your BMPs and leaves clean, rather. So it has to leave clean. So you need to perform monthly inspections. You need to collect water samples. Well, why do you need to collect water samples? Because they have standards. There are a couple of things out in the waterways. There are water where your water ends up is called your receiving water. Okay, so when, for example, here where I'm at, when the water leaves my location now, we're not a SIC covered facility, we're a consulting company. But where my building is, if water would leave, it goes to Pixley Slough. Okay. Pixley Slough may have certain requirements, certain what they call TMDLs, which I won't go into detail, but it has certain standards. And then I want to make sure that I meet those standards. So what the general permit program does is it says water leaving your property, we have these general standards, they're called numeric action level standards. And then sometimes based on as your location is where you're receiving water is the water that comes out of your where it ends up where your water ends up, they may have special TMDL standards as well. So you want to make sure that when you click samples, they're looking at first are meeting the general standards, the general numeric action level standards, these standards for the water leaving the property. And then two, are we meeting the standards from the TMDLs? Now, one thing I like about the permit is it has what they call a ERA process, an exceedance response action process, where if you go over the numeric action level, the general standards, instead of being punished right away for being over the numbers, it allows you steps to take to correct it. So you stay in compliance with the permit as long as you take your proper steps to make your water better, add more BMPs. And again, when you add more BMPs, you put it into your SWEP, you update your SWEP, and then every month you go out and do your monthly inspection and make sure that your BMPs are good. So you see how that process works. It's a step-by-step process. So you have to do monthly inspections, you have to collect water samples, and then you also have to do what's called an annual comprehensive facility compliance evaluation, or for short, annual evaluation. So towards the end of the stormwater year, by the way, the stormwater year starts in July, ends in June. It starts July 1st, ends June 30th. Okay, it's a fiscal year. And towards the end of the fiscal year, you're supposed to do a comprehensive facility assessment where it's kind of like a monthly inspection, but on steroids. It's very detailed. You look at your SWEP, you look at your activities, you look at all your results from the year, you make an assessment as to things that need to be updated or whatever. And then you once you prepare that, then you're required to do an annual report, which is due by July 15th. Because once the season ends on July 1st, then now you can come back and you can do the previous year's annual report, reporting on what you had from the previous year. So, should your stormwater sample show numeric action levels or TMDL exceedance, then you have to have someone with my credentials, a qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, to assist you with exceedance response actions. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that, but again, I actually do like the ERA process because it allows you to stay in compliance with the permit. It allows you to stay in compliance while you try to make improvements. It's working with businesses to make things better, not punishing them when they find a mistake. Now, as of 2020, especially in Southern California, they added some NELs, numeric effluent limits. So should the stormwater sample show you that you're receiving water limitation exceeds causing numeric effluent limitations, NELs, then basically you're in violation of the permit at that point, and you're required to do water quality-based corrective actions. So I'm not a big fan of NELs. Is because basically if you go over an NEL, you're automatically in violation of the permit, and it requires you to do corrective actions, and you're in violation of the permit. So interesting thing is with NELs, you're not in violation of the permit as long as you take actions to fix things. With NELs, you are in violation of the permit, but you still have to fix it. So that's why I'm not a fan. I'd much rather work with people and help them stay in compliance than slap them on the hand first and then cover up the fact. That's just personal. All right. So one of the things about NELs that we have to mention here is compliance options. So one of the things that the permit came up with was things called compliance options. So for people who are under NEL requirements, you can do one of two things. Okay, I won't go into too much detail because they're quite elaborate, but you can do what's called an on-site compliance option or an off-site compliance option. The on-site compliance option is that you can build a pond with 80th percentile 24-hour storm size pond and have your water go to that pond, and then you have to do certain types of monitoring and groundwater monitoring and different things. But if you can meet the criteria for the on-site option, then a lot of the requirements for the permit go away. A lot of the NEL situations go away. Or if you can capture your water and send it to somebody off-site who will process your water for them, which in most cases would be like, say, like a sanitary sewer, like a sewer company. If that's an option for you and you can send to them and they agree to accept your water and give you written notification that they accept and will process your water for you, then that will free you even more from permit requirements. So it's as good as, in many ways, as good as basically offset compliance is almost as good as an NEC. It's really quite a good option. Now, the only problem is both these options have benefits. However, meeting the requirements for these options are for most facilities quite challenging and in most cases unattainable because there's a lot of, again, the on-site compliance requires monitoring different from the NOI monitoring of discharges leaving your property, water going off site down the property. But at the same time, it's still monitoring of sorts. Whereas the off-site option which very, very, very few people have option to, because basically most sanitary sewer companies will tell you they can't take stormwater because it'll overwhelm their system. They can't accept stormwater. They can only take processed wastewater. But if you can use the offset option and that's something you can do, then that would be something to consider, especially for those in areas where NELs apply to you, numeric effluent limits. So again, not a big fan of those, but they're in the permit, they're a reality, and we have to work with them. So NOI, you see why a lot of people are concerned about the NOI, because it's not hard to follow unless you have issues with like NELs or in particular NELs. So let's talk about no exposure certification. Okay. Some facilities may qualify for an NEC coverage. As defined in Appendix 2, it states that a condition of no exposure means that a discharger's industrial activities and materials are not exposed to stormwater. So, if you believe your entire facility's stormwater discharges are comprised entirely of stormwater that has not been exposed to industrial activity, then it could qualify for an NEC coverage if it meets the general permit conditions as outlined in the different sections, section 17 and appendix 2. Okay. So what are the conditions? So people say, wait a minute, NEC coverage. I like that. What does that mean? Okay. Well, let's talk about it. One of the things I've heard it said before, no exposure certification means no exposure. Okay. Some people think, well, I do most of the things inside, but I do this outside and this outside. Well, if anything's exposed to stormwater, it disqualifies you from NEC. So what qualifies for NEC? Well, first off, no exposure means all industrial materials and activities are protected by a storm-resistant shelter to prevent exposure to rain, snow, snowmelt, and or runoff. Okay, and boy, there is a very detailed description of what rain-resistant shelters are. 2, industrial materials and activities include, but are not limited to, material handling equipment or activities, industrial machinery, raw materials, intermediate products, byproducts, and final products or waste products. Okay. 3, one of the things that is there is material handling activities include storage of loading, unloading, and transport, or the conveyance of raw materials, intermediate materials products by final product or waste product. Okay. So this is one where people get mixed up. Material handling activities including loading and unloading. People say, well, hey, we do everything inside. All we do is load or load outside. If you load or unload outside, out in the open, it's still exposed. And so that kind of disqualifies you. So you have to be careful of that. 4, final products intended to be used outdoors. For example, let's just say if you're a manufacturer of automobiles, automobiles are designed to be outside. So when you build a car, if you park it outside after it's built, it's designed to be outside, so it's considered NEC compliant. So are well-maintained forklifts or machinery, as long as they're not contaminated with pollutants from inside, they're allowed to be outside as long as they're maintained and their maintenance is good. So basically, it's typically pose little risk of polluting stormwater since it's not typically contaminated with pollutants that become mobilized by contact with stormwater. So one of the things that people like to know is, first off, container racks and other transportation platforms like wooden pallets, as long as they're clean and don't have any residuals on them, could be left outside. Also, by the way, if you have tanks, but they're all piped together and there's no exposure, that's fine. If you have drums outside, but they're covered and closed and they're clean, those could be considered NEC compliant as long as there's no residual material on them and they're completely closed and the bungs are completed. Okay. As far as storm resistant shelters, it has to be completely roofed in walled buildings, or it could be structures with only a top. Okay. Now people say, oh, I could just put just a like an overhang. Okay. But there is a caveat, and that's one thing about the permit you always find. There's always a caveat that provided that the material within the structure is not subject to wind dispersion, kind of like sawdust or powders, or being tracked out of the facility, or is not a source of pollutants that stormwater destroys. In other words, if you have a cover over something, but the wind can blow it off, doesn't count. If the water can, if you have a covered structure with no sides, but then the water flows underneath it and washes pollutants out, then that's not good enough. It has to be no exposure. So for example, if you have something outside and it's over cover and it sits up off the ground on a pallet, then that will apply because now you have it off the ground, not exposed, it's not washing out, it's not blowing in the wind. So make sure that you have that. So one of the things, oh, by the way, so let's talk about how to file for an NEC. Well, first off, you need to create a PRD. Just like the NOI, the NEC has its own permit registration documents. Okay. Now, what people don't know is there is a checklist you need to complete, and it can be pretty detailed. We created a checklist based on the general permit, but basically it's all there. It's basically a checklist you can see from the general permit section there, 17. You also still need to create a site map because the site map needs to show the water board, look, here's our facility and look, nothing's uncovered. Okay. Again, if you have never had permit coverage before, you'll need to create a smarts account. Okay. And 2, you'll need to complete the NEC form on smarts once you have your smarts account and certify it. Okay. Now the good thing about NEC is, unlike the NOI that has a rather relatively high, it has it's over $1,700 for most that I've seen on average, depending on how much exposure you have for the permit fee. For NEC, it's only 200 and some odd dollars. I'm not sure. I know it's under $300 for the NEC. And the good thing is, all you have to do every year, as long as you maintain NEC status, just all you have to do every year is just go back and renew that nothing's changed. Now, I will tell you this. Well, first off, let's go over here. Then I'll give you a little insight. One of the things that you have to do with the NEC is at the end of it, just like with the NOI coverage, you still have to perform an annual evaluation. But annual evaluation basically says, look, have we double checked everything? Are we still undercover? Are we still loaded undercover? Do we have things covered? Are we doing inside? Is there nothing escaping? Okay. Now, one of the things that people forget is they do stuff undercover, but they have activities that vent to their roofs and drop stuff off from the roofs. The NEC talks about that. That's why you have to be careful. If you have venting to your roof and you have industrial activity inside that vents and deposits pollutants to your roof, that disqualifies you for an NEC. So just because you do things undercover, make sure that you're not venting any kind of pollutants that will hit your roof and wash off the storm drain. That's one of the things the water board will watch for, besides just being covered, are there venting to your roof. So when you have someone, so if you have someone do an assessment for NEC, many times one thing they'll do besides look at what you have is, well, what kind of venting do you have? What kind of activities are you doing inside that will get outside? I have a client where they do welding, but they have an external venting system, but they don't use it. They actually have internal venting systems where they have individual units that capture and collect the inside the building, because the bigger system broke down and it would cost more to do that than just use portable units. But it worked in their favor because now they can better qualify for an NEC because they don't have any venting to the roof. It's not going to the roof, it's all being captured inside. Make sure that you're certified on smarts annually, and then you'll pay your fee. Now, here's a little bit of advice. If you believe you have an NEC and you apply for an NEC, do you know the water board, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, will come by and visit you? Okay, they will cap it, and if you don't qualify, they will force you into an NOI. Okay, you'll be out of compliance, and you will force into an NOI. So if you do qualify for an NEC and you get NEC, do everything you can to maintain that NEC status, because again, not just the water board's watching, but there are third parties who like to take advantage of companies. So make sure that if you have NEC coverage, that you really truly do qualify for NEC coverage, and that you do maintain NEC coverage. Okay, just a word to the wise. So let's talk about notice of non-applicability. So I hope everybody's gotten their coffee. NONA. This is the holy grail of permit exemptions, if you can get it. Facilities normally requiring germ permit coverage may be eligible for an exemption from the germ permit requirements if they qualify for a valid notice of non-applicability. Okay. So what makes up the notice of non-applicability? Okay, what is it? Well, there's two components. One, if your facility is engineered and constructed to have and contain the maximum historical precipitation event or series of events using the precipitation data collected from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency's, the NOAA website. So in other words, you have a facility and you're able to build a massive pond that can handle the largest storm in history and the biggest storm, and or a series, as well as a series of storms leading up to the biggest storm in history. Okay, that is a lot of water, especially if you've been around for California for any length of time. We had a very heavy storm back in I think it was 16, 17. Remember, we had big storms during the time when the Oroville Dam almost busted. Those storms really set the bar higher. So what happens is you have NOAA, and what NOAA did was they want you to use the official government NOAA websites for your numbers, and for each area is different. Like I said, California, that's why we have 9 regions. California has varied. So what may be NOAA coverage in Mojave may be much different than NOAA coverage up here in Northern California, because of the water difference in terms of how much water they have. So a pond down even Mojave, or a pond down in San Diego, or Chula Vista, or somewhere down there, or LA, as opposed to a pond that I would need maybe in Eureka or Redding, are going to be totally different. It's based on the local weather station, the NOAA weather station, and what it does, you look at the history of that area, look for the largest storm, and they basically figure out, based on those calculations, how much water you need to be able to hold on to. And believe me, those ponds are massive. Or your facility sits in a location or other physical location that is not a tributary or hydraulically connected to the large United States. Okay. So, in other words, there are some places that are blessed in that where they sit, their water, the area, their location, the actual area itself doesn't drain to any of the waters of the United States. Okay. Rivers, creeks, lakes, streams, none of that. It doesn't go to the waters of the United States. If that's the case, then you're in a natural, if you're in a naturally hydraulically unconnected, it's not connected to the waters of the United States, a physical location, then you can qualify for a NONA. So once again, what qualifies for a NONA? One, you have a facility that's designed or built to be able to handle a massive, massive amount of water. Or two, you're in a location where it doesn't drain to a wide United States, that no matter what, your area can be underwater in the massive United States. So for example, we have a former client that was in Tracy, and the street was up here, and their facility is, it was there was a open pit quarry that went down. So to get to the facility off the street, you actually had to go down into the quarry. Okay. And this quarry, they when the NONA first came out, stuff came out in 2015, they were a shoe-in to get a NONA because if you look at the facility, I don't care how much rain you get, because actually the facility it sets here, they actually in the quarry, there was another lower section of the quarry that the water that would go into the quarry from rain and stuff would gather in this corner, and they had a little bit of a pond, a little runoff pond, where the water would sit and then eventually just kind of work its way into the ground. So this, oh, by the way, real quick, this is a surface waters permit. If water stays on property and slopes into the ground, that's not a discharge. It's not water leaving your property. Okay. It's they're talking about water leaving your property is water washing off of your property. So that's why a pond works, because it's going into the ground. There's groundwater requirements, but in terms of the industrial general stormwater permit, it's surface water, it's discharges or water leaving your property and going to the waters of the United States. Okay. So this facility, the way it's designed, that even if it were to fill up, the buildings would be underwater before it meet that standard. So, and still have several hundred feet before it got to the street. So if a facility ever qualified for NONA, that facility did. It was really a very unique situation. So how do you file for a NONA? I bet you're all sitting, yeah, how do we file for a NONA? Okay, again, the NONA is the holy grail. It is the gold standard. So what does it require? Well, first off, you have to have a California licensed professional engineer create a no discharge technical report demonstrating as previously stated, that either your facility can handle all that water we talked about, all that historical maximum precipitation, now if I can speak English, that'd be nice, precipitation, or two, it's in a basin that doesn't require it, it doesn't go to the waters of the United States, and therefore it doesn't require permit coverage. Okay, so really a large part of a NONA is on the shoulders of an engineer. That's why you really need to find an engineer that's got a hydrological background. There are some engineers that are a little concerned about NONAs, and they won't do it because they're a little concerned about it. But I know several engineers who will do NONAs. And believe me, when they do their calculations, they're going to be conservative about it. So, because, if an engineer doesn't do their calculations correct, they can lose their licensing, and it takes a lot of work to become an engineer. So they're going to do it right. They're going to make sure that their numbers, everything is accurate. So once an engineer makes a determination that you qualify for a NONA, the water board is going to accept that as gold. Okay. So if a California engineer says, yes, this facility qualifies, and then they'll do their calculations. They'll create the technical report outlining the numbers based on the NONA requirements and all that stuff, and it'll work out that way. Okay, or they'll say, look, this facility is in a basin, and again, the engineer can outline how the basin is such that it doesn't whatever. Either way, the engineer can make the case in the no discharge technical report that the facility meets the NONA standard. Okay, so once that's accomplished, that's like 99% of the work. Then all you have to do is, like I said before, if you don't have a smarts account yet, you need to create a smarts account. And then once you create a smarts account, you need to complete a NONA application on smarts. And in the application, you need to include the no discharge technical report. Now, make sure on the report that the engineer physically wet signs the report with his number. You know, they have that embossment stamp with their signature, because basically their reputation's on the line. So I know I keep saying this, but it's important. Believe me, an engineer is not going to do. They're going to make sure that their numbers are accurate, because their certification, their is on the line. So their credentials are on the line. So they're going to do a good job. And the water board, if they get a technical report from an engineer saying this meets those standards, the water board is going to accept that. Now, the good thing about a NONA is, once you get a NONA, then you're out of the general permit altogether. You don't have to worry about anything else. You're literally completely out of the general permit. So again, to recap, there are three basic kinds of coverage. You have the notice of intent coverage, and we kind of went over, again, very briefly. I know in the time we have, it's hard to go over in detail. What I do suggest is, last year I did a couple of basic stormwater trainings. In the Stormwater Awareness Week, you can probably go to our Forge website, the WGR's Forge website, and look at in detail some of the training on stormwater awareness 2023. On the I did 3 workshops, but really the 2 workshops you really needed, my first one and my second one, on what about the BMPs, and then what about the monitoring. And basically it'll kind of go over what's entailed in having notice of intent coverage in more detail. You have to do monitoring, you have to put BMPs in place, you have to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan. And another thing too about having NOI coverage, if you've never had NOI coverage before, you have to have someone with my credentials and a QISP, qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, do what's called a new discharger certification, because we have to determine, look, we have to make a determination based on, remember I mentioned earlier, your receiving water and how there's quality standards in the receiving water. Well, we have to look at those water quality standards in the receiving water and determine, does your business threaten those water quality standards in the receiving water? Okay. If it does, then you have to add some BMPs right off the bat before you can get the permit, to make sure that whatever pollutants you may have that may be affected by the standards in the receiving water are not going to be affected. So that's why you have to have a QISP, someone with my credentials, say, look, yes, okay, this facility, this water body, for example, they have there's nitrates in this water, receiving water, where your water ends up. This facility, yes, they do deal with fertilizers, but they do this, they have this BMP, they have this BMP. All this will help to mitigate it so that there won't be a problem. Or in most cases, what happens is you have a facility where the QISP will look at the receiving water and say, look, here's the different TMDLs, the different standards in this water body. And then the QISP will come back and say, well, here's the industrial activity of this facility. None of these activities have pollutants that affect these particular pollutants of concern in this particular water body. So therefore, it doesn't apply, so you're good to go. Either way, you need to have someone with my credentials create your SWEP, because you are a new discharger if you've never had permit coverage before. Or if you're in a facility, now the only difference is if you're, for example, let's just say you were a manufacturer and you take over manufacturing from somebody else, they have permit coverage, they quit, you take over, and you basically do the same thing they were doing, just change names, then you don't have to have a new discharger certification because you're doing the exact same thing, the exact same activity, and they had permit coverage previously. That's the only other reason. Okay, so now we have 6 minutes left in the hour, and I was wondering if anybody have any questions for me, anything I can answer.
We do have a couple questions, Aaron. So our first one is a bioinfiltration basin an off-site or an on-site option?
That's an on-site option if it's on your property.
Okay,
So
fantastic. Go ahead.
yeah,
The
perfect.
next question is, does California require that the SWIP be prepared and signed by an engineer, or does the site map need to be prepared by an engineer?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is yes and no. Sorry, I'm not a politician. There are certain businesses, there are mines, and there are certain types of businesses that do require an engineer's certification on things. But for most businesses, it does not require an engineer certification either of the map or of the SWEP. So I can do a lot of SWEPs. I'm not an engineer, and I could do a lot of SWEPs and SWEP maps for people because their facility does not need to have that kind of specialized professional engineer added certifications.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we have. We've got a couple more minutes, so if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, thank you so much, Aaron, for presenting. There is so much good information. To everyone that has been watching, if you joined late or missed a section of it due to technical difficulties, we did record this workshop and it will be available on our website, stormwaterawareness.org, within 24 to 48 hours. So you can go back and watch it, you can share it, you can reference it later in the year. It will be free indefinitely so that you can use this as a resource. And looks like we have another question that just came in, so I'll hand that over to you before we sign off. But the question is, can't an industrial facility discharge to an offsite bioinfiltration basin via an MS4 storm drain with permission from the MS4?
That's interesting. So it goes offsite to a bioinfiltration basin by permission of another. I'd have to look into that because it is still leaving the property, but it's not necessarily going to the waters of the United States. It's going to a biofiltration. So basically, if that's a good question. So the question, read the question one more time. I'll make sure I understand that, Rebecca.
Okay. Can't an industrial facility discharge to an offsite bioinfiltration basin via an MS4 storm drain with permission from the MS4?
With permission from the MS4. Yes, it can, but you have to get it in writing. It had to be in writing because basically the MS4 would be accepting responsibility for your water. But that I never actually had that happen before. That would be a fascinating study. I'm pretty sure the water board wouldn't have an issue with it. I never actually had that faced that before. But if the water leaves your property and goes to a bioinfiltration facility, which is fine, but via the MS4, but the MS4 gives you permission to use it, that's fine. I do have one client where the water leaves their property, goes along the ditch, and it goes back into their own pond. So yeah, you want to make sure that you get that permission in writing.
Okay, it looks like we are out of time. So thank you for presenting, Aaron. And we have a great lineup of workshops the rest of the week. So be sure to check that out. The one that's starting at 8 o'clock, so just in a couple minutes, is a comprehensive introduction to erosion sediment control. That's a phenomenal workshop. You're not going to want to miss it. And then for industrial folks, to piggyback off of Aaron's workshop, On Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, we have a Clean Water Act litigation and the industrial general permit that you're not going to want to miss. Third-party litigators are a real problem, and so you're going to want to head over to that workshop and learn how to deal with it. So that's Thursday at 3 p.m. Be sure to register for that. But thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at the next workshop.
Thank you.